and we took a break now, which we'll try to avoid. We're going to shorten the lunch break. We're going to overrun now, and then the lunch break will be starting after the lunch break will start right on time. So we just shorten the lunch break and we'll catch up. All right. No lunch. No lunch.
No lunch? No lunch? Is it a question mark or a full stop?
Let's get started because we are a little behind, but I've been assured that we will have a little bit extra and a shorter lunch break. Just to introduce, I'm Mohan, sitting on my left. The team will be the rapporteur and has a more difficult job. And of course, Mr. Kogo is going to be the spotter and catch you or when you want to intervene in the discussion. Let me make a very brief introduction because I know that there is a wealth of talent here and wealth of ideas, so I should not unnecessarily impinge on the time. There are three questions laid out. I don't necessarily want to focus entirely on those questions. I think the first one, what we mean by understanding of improving human society is very important. And I'll try to elaborate a little bit on that point. The second point about real or potential achievements, I think we discussed this a little bit in the previous session, whether it's potential or actual achievement. The third point is, of course, once we have identified what the criteria are, the broad criteria, then one has to get into metrics or indicators. I doubt very much whether we will have time to get into that level of detail, but it is nevertheless there. Now, to start with, let's discuss very briefly the first point on what might be some broad areas. Now, I said in my intervention in the previous session that instead of getting hung up on whether it should be for this discipline or that we should be looking more at impacts on human development progress and the transformation of human society, which is the point made by Dr. Mehta. I think I've just come from 3 weeks at the Earth Summit in Rio. I must tell you that I was also at the 1992 Earth Summit, and one of the things I proposed in 1992 was the Sustainable Development Triangle, that we should look at progress of humanity in terms of 3 dimensions: an economic dimension, because we cannot survive without money, it's very important, and so on, but also a social dimension, which is basically the rules, the cultural values, the glue that binds society together. And of course, the third leg is the environmental side, the natural resources. And it seems to me that if we look at a set of criteria, it might be useful to start by thinking of potential or actual economic impacts. Does it make production better, easier, cheaper? Does it look at some social impacts, particularly whether it helps the poor? This is one of the dimensions. And the third criterion or set of criteria might be on the environmental side, in the sense of whether it protects the environment and so on, and certainly avoids further harm. Now, based on that, I think, and drawing on the previous session, it might be useful to think of whether the prize will in fact inspire the kinds of value change, particularly ethical and moral value change in the young, which promotes sustainability along various dimensions, and therefore make human development more sustainable. And then, of course, the two broad generic points would be whether the work is actually original and innovative, and we have to discuss perhaps a little bit what we mean by innovative or original. And the second point, another broad point, might be whether the work is practical and implementable in a sense, which is a different dimension. Let me finish by just briefly touching on why I particularly emphasize sustainability. And that is because the problems of the world that exist today are different from existed at the time of Alfred Nobel and other people who went out prizes. I think we face multiple problems, and we are really looking for integrated solutions. We cannot find a silver bullet in one discipline which will solve all of these problems. So we need to find integrated solutions. And I mean, whether we are facing the financial economic crisis or resource shortages or climate change or terrorism or any of the other issues, we really have to think broadly. The second point is that the value system we have is really driving us in an unsustainable direction. I mean, basically, from a social perspective, we have values like greed, intolerance, violence, and so on, which is basically causing major problems. It is also driving an economic system, the other leg of the triangle, which is based on just more and more consumption of material goods and basically on debt, which is a very important point. I mean, our grandparents basically saved so that we could have a better life, but we have discovered a different route. We have discovered that we can actually borrow from our grandchildren and therefore have a better life. So what is left for them? So the unsustainable social values have created an economic system based on debt and material consumption. And that in turn has created an environmental debt, which is destroying the environment. So I think that sort of nexus of issues might help us to decide what are the impacts that will transform humanity and human progress in a way that is, quote, better. Let me stop there. One last point, that we have many, many stakeholders, and the success of this prize to some extent is going to be how well we mobilize the coalition of stakeholders. We tend to overemphasize the influence of governments. With apologies to those who have had high positions in government, I've advised many of them, but I find that leaders of countries are less and less capable of dealing now with the multiple problems we face. And the many conferences I've been, I find that they have been not very decisive. In fact, at the middle level of governance, particularly at the level of mayors, CEOs of companies, you find much more decisive action, and we should be reaching out to those kinds of stakeholders. We should be reaching out also through our criteria and the definition of the prize to business, who can actually move in a much more sustainable direction and also provide resources. And we certainly have to look out and work with civil society. Because just to make this point, in Rio 20 last month, the governments really did not do much. I mean, the outcome was really very disappointing. We expected it. But the People's Summit, which I also participated in, outside of the official, was much more productive. This was entirely driven by civil society, and there were in fact a series of people's treaties drafted. So we should reach out to civil society as well. And I think we should build on that triangle of government, business, and civil society, and somehow this prize can pull all of this together, I hope. Thank you very much, and the floor is open for a discussion.
Sorry, we will continue on the list as from the last round, from those who were short-circuited last time. We will continue.
Thank you for giving me a second bite of the apple. two relatively trivial, and one I think might be more significant. The first is a real problem with the name Tesla. Not a problem with the man, with the history, but a problem with the name. At least in the United States, the Tesla Prize would be recognized as having been given in honor of the electric car manufacturer, startup company in California. That's the Tesla in America. And if you want to have a prize called Nobel, of course most people don't recognize that that's a dynamite company, or chemical company now, but I do think that's a fact of the matter. Second, it does go back to the Nobel Prizes in a different way. When the physics prize was first awarded 100 some years ago, there were estimated 1,000 active physicists in the world. And so most of the good ones knew most of the good ones. There wasn't any great mystery about who was the most important, significant contributor to physics in that time. As we broaden our thinking to something, frankly, as broad as sustainability, there are millions of people participating in that game at various ways. And the practical problem of sorting out who has actually done something different and more significant than somebody else probably is both impossible to do and terribly divisive if you do it. If you reward person A, then B, C, D, E, and F will be offended, and all their colleagues and their friends and their associations and their countries and their political theories will be offended. So I think there's something important to be said for narrowing the scope rather sharply to identifiable communities of people who would be working in ways to recognize each other as being significant. So the prize award isn't accompanied by a huge fight about what mistake the committee made. And then the more important point, I'd like to try to generalize it as several points that got made toward the end of the conversation this morning, to say that we really do need to decide what the purpose of the prize is. And I formulate it this way, that there are four possibilities, I think, to that question, to that answer to that question. One is to reward, to thank somebody for doing something very important. The second thing you can do with a prize is to inspire others to do similar. The third thing you can do is to enable people to do things. And the fourth thing you can do is to advertise the integrity of the sponsor of the prize. In other words, it's a publicity for the awarder rather than publicity for the awardee. And the Nobel Prize Committee got lucky in picking some high-profile people at the beginning, and that gave the prize a lot of prestige, rather than the other way around. The recipients reward the rewarder. Now, these are not mutually exclusive categories, but it's worth thinking about inspiring, rewarding, or enabling. Forget about the publicity part. I think that's relatively minor, and I don't believe it's operating in this case. If it were, this would be perhaps the Youssef Prize, but it's not. It's the Tesla Prize we're talking about. So if we thank, we inspire, or we enable, and until we decide which of those are our focus, we're not able to think about appropriate awardees, procedures, and criteria if we don't know what we're doing. So I think we should try to sort through what is our basic purpose.
Thank you. I think since we are continuing with speakers from the previous session, the focus is not exactly on the topic of this session, but that is fine. I mean, it's a continuation of the previous session. But I would just like to remind you that in your remarks, if you can say what is relevant in your remarks to the criteria. I think that would be helpful to advance the thinking of this, the purpose of this session. The next speaker is Mr. Sigouridis.
Sure. Actually, I had a very similar starting the question. I had a very similar suggestion as the last speaker. In terms of, we need to define, I think, eventually a vision and a mission for the award. one way or another so that we can actually continue the discussion in a more structured fashion. So exactly we know what exactly the award wants us to be about. Now, thought came through the discussion, and when there was a suggestion that essentially, and also the vision of Mr. Yusuf, to have the award to essentially promote something that, the possibility of doing something that has not been done yet. And that, I think, entails some risk. I mean, venture capitals do it. Venture capitalists do it, but is the award willing to do it? I think actually it can be inclusive to that, and Tesla would actually appreciate such an award. Right? Because if we really identify a genius, then someone who actually did contribute very significantly at the early part of his effort. He was unrecognized for several years. Essentially, the issue between DC and AC, right? But then later in his life, he also had several other ideas that he did not have the chance to actually contribute to, because he didn't have the financial support, I guess. So in that case, if we have a lifetime achievement award, then we can also potentially support the possibility of doing something with the money that is helpful that had not been done before. Now, specifically to the discussion of the criteria, I just want to mention that the criteria should actually be physical and measurable. So somehow it's very hard to essentially, although we all recognize the value, let's say, of a great musical performance or contribution or a genius in that sense, in the arts, for example, it's very hard to actually quantify it. And I think because of the Tesla name, I agree with you that it might be hard to establish, but I don't agree with the fact that we should actually change it. I think it's a very interesting award to be there. It is something that should be based on the physical world. And of course, there is the issue of social equality, and that's also something measurable. So if something that has a physical, tangible invention, be it a business intervention or an invention that actually supported large amount of people, then I think that's something that we should be considering doing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting point about whether the name should remain Tesla, and perhaps some of the other speakers might reflect on this. I'll be agnostic on this for a moment. Let me ask Dr. Giton.
First, I think we need to pay more attention to two questions by one and by Catherine. The first one was, is it for past or future? And the other was, is it for a person or for a project? And I think we can make a proposition to combine the both, to give money to a person for his achievement and for the project he's able to lead for the future. If we do that, we can cancel all the problem of comparison with Nobel Prize, because the problem is not to give another Nobel Prize, even for multidisciplinary, because it's also very complicated. So achievement of a person needs the ability to launch a project, a big project. The criteria for the achievement are very numerous, are very different. It could be artists, scientists, it could be people with demonstrated a lot of emotional intelligence, and even if it's not so easy to assess. Okay. And for the project, I think we have a kind of agreement. You speak about sustainability, we speak about the human rights, we speak about education, health, democracy, the way to decide together. So I think it would be quite easy for a committee to evaluate the quality of a project, and at the same time to honor and to assess the ability of a person because it's past achievement. And I think it could be sometimes very interesting to have a person, a physician, who has a big achievement and decide to make all that intelligence and what is experience of the service of the project of the mountain. So it could be interesting to have not a well-defined with a very narrow spectrum because we don't know how this kind of price will evolve. So to have to be able to be versatile, and at the same time to have a pretty clear criterion that will represent the person and the collective interest for the unity of the project.
Thank you very much. Josephine, next person.
Thank you very much. In more practical terms, and picking up on the idea that Professor Crow put forward earlier and others have referred to, some qualities such as inspiration or leadership or potential can't be quantified, but they can be recognized. And I wonder if it would be possible to think of a two-stage process whereby some people might be nominated and then invited to submit some kind of paper, a very short one, describing their achievements and then defining the sorts of things that they might be able to do with their orientation to meet the criteria that are already publicly announced. And then it would be possible to shortlist. You see, I'm very optimistic. I think there will be so many people who have this kind of potential that there will be a number of candidates, and therefore a multi-layered selection process can take place. Once there is more of a short list, then I think it's vital that the person be invited to meet the selectors in order to be able to convey the intangibles, the immeasurables that can't come across solely on paper, and that would form a more robust selection mechanism. And I agree that we need to think through the multiple selection criteria. Some of them can be determined in advance, others during the process in response to the first submissions of nominations. It may be possible then, having seen the field of candidates, to come up with a common question that all of the candidates are invited to respond to, in writing and in person. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's very valuable because I think to a great extent the criteria that emerge, the vision and the criteria will determine to some extent, to a great extent, the selecting committee. And it is the prestige of the committee which will allow us to avoid potential controversies that were mentioned earlier on. I don't think we should be concerned about that. I think if we have the right kinds of people on the committee, we can ensure a fair process, which is I think we can come up with the right kind of candidates and select the right person. The next person, the speaker is Momir Juron.
Thank you. The question I should ask, why the price is going to be a tackle? That's the major question. The price is not the practical. So what's the need of the price? And I don't agree that you shouldn't care what the prices are. We have to compete with them. How we can compete? We can make a better copy or invent something new. And that's something to decide. Are you going to make a better copy? Copy-paste better than Nobel or anything else? Or to invent completely differently? And that's something to be discussed. But then we come to the point 3, which is on the agenda now. Improving human society is really something that is a political matter. In my experience, especially in Europe, we have gone through the golden age of natural and technical sciences. Since DC is pressing hard in social sciences and humanities. Coming from the natural and technical sciences, I think that we improve human society by new inventions. But that's not the case with the social sciences and humanities. So this term has to be considered very carefully. Very carefully. That means what sort of the topics we are going to consider for the prize. That's not the case in states. When I asked Escher, what's the case of editor of science, what's the case of humanities states, he told me no, I would be given for humanities. But Europe is Europe. freshly hard to humanities and social sciences given by management. Coming to the potential, you know, you can read many articles written by the professionals on the potential that every child, unless it is polluted by education, has a brilliant and genius ideas, potential. What is the potential? I don't know what is the potential. You have to achieve something. Every one of us has a genius potential for something, but only if you achieve something. So I don't think that the world should be given for potential. Especially it's extremely difficult to guarantee that potential is going to have effects. So I should suggest that potential should be completely taken out of consideration. And coming to the last point, how to identify. We all know, since we are all in the science, that science has been privatized heavily by the people who are editors and by the people who review grants. That is at the present the only possible way to go. But that's not the best way, you know. We all know. So identifying the best people is a really complicated issue today. See, that's not only among scientists, it's among politics, especially the price gets to be known and attractive, then everything is involved in it. So this issue should be really very carefully tested, since I don't think that any one of us is pleased with the procedures we have now today in identifying things. Even, I don't think you get a lot, but you know that there are a lot of crises which have been identified, later on discovered that identified wrongly. I can't say that for fields, methods, since I'm not familiar too much, but I'm familiar with some physicists, not right, all of us. So that is a really big issue. And that means who is going to identify? Somebody suggested independent personality. We all claim here that we are all independent personalities, since we belong to academic world. And that's a principle of belonging to academic world. We are independent, but that's not true. That's not true. We are all independent. So that is a really tricky case how to do that. And that is probably the first issue which might bring attractiveness of the science. If we find a value, how to be really independent in finding the best achievements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that a lot of room for food for thought. Just to come back, I think we have the prize, its prestige, and its integrity will depend on the criteria and the people who select, the integrity of those who select. And of course, the fairness of the process. I think all three are interlinked.